So welcome everyone. Welcome to Nordic Youth Voices on Climate Finance. This is a panel organized by Generation Climate Europe. So on behalf of Generation Climate Europe, I want to welcome all of our speakers and our audience today. So maybe we can just jump right into it. So far at COP30, it may be more of a personal impression that I've had, but finance seems to be underpinning every single discussion and every single negotiation track. I was in conversation with some other negotiators, youth activists, civil society, really anyone you talk to on pretty much any given topic, including adaptation, just transition. They all say, well, who will pay for this? It really all goes back to how do we fund the just transition? How do we fund adaptation solutions or mitigation solutions? So obviously that brings us to the question, if we think about climate finance, who pays for this and who bears the responsibility to pay for this? Looking back at COP29, a lot of civil society, but also many delegations were very saddened by the outcomes on the NCQG, which was, just as a reminder, that we will have $300 billion per year by 2035. From developed countries and 1.3 trillion per year mobilized from all sources. And this was widely criticized as insufficient. And if we compare this with real needs, just as an example, adaptation alone is estimated at 215 to 387 billion per year needed by 2030. So this obviously raises a question, is finance even being categorized properly? Is it being tracked properly? And clearly, it is not just a negotiation point. It is a leitmotif of this entire process. And as to why we decided to host this event at the Nordic Pavilion and to apply to host our event here is because Nordics play a very unique role in this process, and they play somewhat of an outsized role considering their size as funders, as innovators, and as norm setters. And youth, in this respect, play accountability drivers, and they bring a more justice-focused perspective. And so today's conversation, we will explore the role of Nordic youth in the process, but we are also very happy to hear perspectives, particularly from here and from Brazil. We are, after all, in Belém, and right now we want to really spotlight the perspectives from where we are. And so I think I will just maybe introduce now our speakers. I will start with Sigurd. He is the Danish youth delegate to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. He represents Danish youth in the UN negotiations on climate, biodiversity, and plastics pollution. And he actively works to strengthen the inclusion of young people in decision-making spaces. He has experience in climate policy work also through the Youth Climate Council, the YMCA Scouts, in addition to his role as a youth delegate. And he has been actively participating in negotiations for the past several years, and he has attended many already conferences in this space. So thank you so much for being here. Then on to Alicia. She is very active in youth advocacy on climate change, especially focusing on the Latin American context. She is the founder of Latin American Youth Climate Scholarship, which is an initiative that aims to include Black and Indigenous youth from Latin America into the United Nations climate negotiations. And she aims through this initiative to break all the barriers of youth from marginalized communities and to give them the tools to share their perspectives as frontline defenders of their territories. She has co-founded and now leads the strategy, global coordination, and stakeholder engagement in ISLA, I hope I pronounced that right, which is a youth-led international program supporting the participation of climate activists from the Global South in climate conversations. And she's also active in YOUNGO, which is the official youth constituency to the UNFCCC. So thank you so much for being here with us today. And last but not least, Bianca Garvin, who is the YOUNGO Finance and Markets Working Group co-coordinator and co-lead. She has actively worked specifically at COP28 and COP29 to push for higher climate finance ambitions. She has participated in several conferences and advocated for increased youth capacity building in this area, which is particularly important. And she is very passionate about energy transition, climate finance, and markets-based solutions with a focus on high-impact systemic change to tackle climate change. And, which I find particularly inspiring in her work, she also always mainstreams gender equality and gender issues through her work. So thank you all three for being with us today. perhaps we can jump straight into our first question. So what role do Nordic countries play as climate finance actors from your point of view? And how can young people influence this role? Maybe I will first ask Bianca, if you want to take the floor.
Happy to start. Thank you for joining us. And it's, really a pleasure to be here as a Nordic youth. I can mention I'm half Finnish, half Danish, so representing almost quite a few of the Nordic countries. And maybe I'll try and give slightly perspectives that come a bit more from Finland, given we've got Sigurd from Denmark here. But as Zvezdana was saying, the Nordic countries do play quite a disproportionate role in climate finance, given their size. We are wealthy countries, but we're also very small countries. So our GDP overall, even if it's high per capita, isn't necessarily globally high. Within the negotiations, we've committed a lot into the adaptation fund, pledged into the loss and damage fund as well. And we generally push for very high ambition on climate finance outcomes. We also push quite a bit for mainstreaming gender within climate finance. So in that sense, we have quite a very high ambition, but given just our sheer size, it's obviously not sufficient. Although I don't have the right statistics, but Denmark pledged more as a single country than the US did into the adaptation fund. So that gives you an idea of that. I guess another point to note as well is the Nordic countries, we negotiate under the Finland, Sweden and Denmark negotiate under the EU bloc. So ultimately, we need to align with the European positions, which are sometimes slightly less higher ambition than what we would be pushing for. So there is that restriction, but then we still push there. And globally, we've got a Nordic Development Bank. Each of the Nordic countries also have a development bank that focuses a lot on the intersection between climate and social issues as well, and have a lot of active programs globally that tackle climate, but also other issues. As to the role of youth, I've been in the space for a few years now, and I do feel like Nordic youth is highly underrepresented, especially in global spaces. We are very lucky to have the Youth Delegate program. I won't touch upon it more. That allows to Nordic young people from each country generally to join COPs and represent the voices of other countries. And I think on a global scale, we're also really lucky to have high participatory democracies. So as a young person, you can get really involved in local action. I think where there's a bit of a gap is getting these local messages out into the world. I've personally spent my life as an expat, so had maybe more touch with the global issues and less in touch with the Nordic issues. But overall, we're slightly less represented, and I think it goes to maybe just the lack of awareness of these international opportunities that we have. And one thing that's very close to something that I've found really eye-opening and a high privilege joining these spaces is that I've been able to have some to engage a lot with youth from the global south, but I feel like that connectivity is also really not there. We're quite insular in some ways in the Nordics, and we need more of that connectivity. Yes, we're impacted by climate change. We're also the region that's warming. We're warming about 4 times faster on average globally than the rest of the world. So we've got really high climate impacts. However, we also have really strong ability to adapt to climate, and we've got really strong mitigation policies. If you turn around, you can see the commitments when each Nordic country has committed to get to net zero, which is super ambitious, and we're working towards that. So we've got really high adaptation and mitigation capacity. So even if we are disproportionately affected by climate, it's not in the same way that some young people in the global south are. And I think we need, as Nordic youth, we need more of that connectivity. We need to bring more of those messages home. So that's some reflections to kick us off.
So I would now ask Alicia to also share maybe her perspective on this question.
Hi everyone, can you hear me well? Okay. My name is Alicia, I'm from Brazil, but before I start saying anything about climate finance, which has been my favorite topic for the past 2 years, I would like to recognize what happened today in each house. We are over right now in Fishensberg, the land of Pinampa people, and we have for the past century survived in this country. So I think my first statement would be to recognize where we are and honor this land and these people. I don't know what's happening. Closer. Hello. Maybe there's. Hello. Hello. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me? I think now it's. Okay. Okay, it's working now. Maybe it was the other microphone. Yeah, I have been in this space for 10 years. I always say.
We must
Hello.
remain resilient.
Let's try.
Let's go.
It's Brazil. Hello. 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 No.
I think.
Hi.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay, let's try. In Brazil, we always say jeitinho brasileiro. We will always find a way to fix little things. So welcome to Brazil. I always say that I'm the fruit of the Paris Agreement. My first COP was before the Paris Agreement, actually. So I have been in this space for the past 10 years. I'm 28 now. I attended my first COP of 17, and hopefully this will be my last, because I think we need to open spaces for new people to come in. So I am the founder of the Latin American Youth Climate Scholarship. We work across 10 countries in Latin America to bring Black and Indigenous voices into these spaces. And I'm also the founder of ISLA. It's an international program. We work across the 5 regions of the world, of the Global South, into bringing these people as well here. I think the role that we all can play is being accountable, and I think that serves as well for our countries. Here we talk a lot about common but differentiated responsibilities, and I think this is a very important principle for us to uphold. And from the Global South, or from Brazil, I can speak for myself. We see the Nordic countries as like progressive because they defend human rights and they come with these beautiful speeches. And I find it amazing when we're talking about the pledges for the funds, by example, because being Brazilian, we know that a lot of climate funds, especially to protect the defenders and the forests, by example, funded by Norway, for example, the Amazon Fund. I have worked with indigenous peoples from the Amazon, from the Brazilian, Colombian Amazon for the past 4 years, 5 years, from tons of different communities. None of them has ever seen any of this money. So it's not about doing pledges and giving pledges. They are important, but what's the quality of the climate finance? I think this is a conversation that we are starting to have. And it goes beyond donations and public and private and concessionality and all of these beautiful and long words that we love when we're discussing climate finance. But it's really about where is this money going and is it reaching the right people? So for the past 2 years on the NCQG and now on 2.1C. So 2.1C is the negotiations where we are discussing the alignment of all finance flows to the Paris Agreement, also the funds that are not from the UNFCCC. We are discussing access. So how can we ensure that projects led by young people in the Global South or by indigenous communities, by example, they can reach these funds. So if you want to today apply for a fund from, I don't know, the adaptation fund that has some modalities for local access, by example, you can literally wait 4 or 5 years to get accredited. And the answer is probably going to be no. And then we're talking about large-scale funding, but many youth-led initiatives do not need large-scale funding, so then they leave it up to philanthropies to fill the gap. So all the programs that I coordinate in Latin America are funded by philanthropies based in the EU and in the US. And I think this is a landscape that we need to change as well. I think public funds need to come through this project. It needs to reach us because the philanthropy only goes so far. So I think Nordic countries are seen as progressive, but then we go to the negotiations. They bring this very amazing, beautiful text on indigenous peoples, but then we need to compromise at some point. You know, if you're doing negotiations at UN, you have to compromise, and this is where they compromise on. So it's beautiful to bring and say, hey, it is here, we have said that, but they don't fight for it. They don't fight for it to stay in the text. So I think there is a huge gap on what we say and what we do, and we know that. And I think it just translates as well into the negotiations. I could go on and talking specifically about 2.1c or NCQG, but I don't think that would be the best outcome here.
Yes, unfortunately, we are a little bit constrained for time, so I will now pass to Sigurd, who will share his perspective.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Sigurd, and I am Denmark's youth delegate to the UN for Climate and Environment. So I'm very happy to be here with you. It also means that usually I focus very much on what Denmark can do better and other European countries. So it's always a bit annoying when I have to be in these spaces and reflect upon how the Nordic does in terms of like other countries in the global scene, because then I have to maybe give a few arguments out to the Nordics and to Denmark. But I'm really happy that our head negotiator is not here, and don't hope she will be. So she won't hear that I do that, because usually, you know, it's about the pressure. It's about that all countries have to do better, because no countries are doing what is needed in terms of what the climate needs and the planet we're living on. But some countries are doing better than others, and some countries can inspire others. And I think there is a chance for the Nordics to inspire others on the climate neutrality goals we have. Some of them are held by some climate credits, which I don't think we are all supporting of. But also when it comes to climate finance in general, we have a higher ODA than the average in OECD. Again, not optimal, but it can inspire others to keep it up and raise the bar. We try to, in the Nordic countries, to be creative when it comes to which schemes can we put in place. When it comes to climate finance, if we see companies that are struggling to help build windmills or go into to some markets, is there something we can do that will help them to do that? Is there securities that can be put in place? And you know, I'm very much trying to balance the thing of like more things can be true at once, because definitely the public finance and the grant-based finance also has to be bigger. But I think to fulfill the 2.1c goal, we will have to look into other schemes to see if we put securities up for companies, we can use less money to get more action done than if we just did a grant-based on that metric than the other metrics that is needed in other cases. And that's important to remember. And then finally, I would mention one thing the Nordics are really good of, and that is youth inclusion in general. I've had several projects with the Nordic Council ministers, and I've been very happy to see what they do. And I have been thinking about the things you also thought about, Bianca, before. Like, why is there so few Nordic people in these spaces? Because usually Nordic youth is very involved. And I think it is to some extent, or part of it is because there's a lot of areas at home where youth can engage as well. And that helps us a lot. And I think a lot of us then, we don't end up going to the UN. And I'm trying to see if we can do some entity that can help youth in Nordics to go to more UN spaces, because I think it'll be helpful. But at the same time, yeah, it's a bit weird why we don't have that much here besides the youth delegates.
Thank you so much for the insights. So maybe we can already move into our second question. So we've already touched upon your work quite a bit, your previous answers, but through your work and through the initiatives that you were involved in, how have you approached the issue of climate finance, and what has your experience been in this field? Did you identify any particular obstacles or any common themes in this area? Maybe I'll give it to Bianca again.
Thank you. It's actually a space that I studied. I did a master's in climate change management and finance at Imperial College, and the pathway from there was often consulting or finance in a bank or a financial institution, where it was a bit questionable whether you were really having a lot of climate impacts. And I've always been a very values-driven person, and I did about 6 weeks of that, and I was like, I'm out of here. And then been working. My day job isn't pure climate finance, but it's at the intersection. Currently, I'm working in heavy industry, high-emitting decarbonization of the high-emitting sectors, steel, cement, chemicals, and others. And our main KPI is to get those large clean industrial projects financed to FID. So looking at it from a broader perspective. But hi, Zihan. But getting into the space in general, I really got into climate finance through YOUNGO, which I think is a great mechanism if you have the patience to fight through some of the noise that there is. And it really opens a lot of doors to sometimes come into spaces as a young person. I'm not saying that we're always given the opportunities that we should get. Youth should have a much larger role at the table, especially because we're the ones who are going to live in the world that is designed today, and we need to push more into generational equity in decisions. But being part of a youth constituency and youth organizations is how I managed to get into this climate finance space. And it, again, to my earlier point, it was maybe not something that I found out about through Nordic channels. It was something that kind of got into through university and other things internationally. So that's another area where we really need to, I think sharing it around you and bringing what you learn globally back home to the Nordics is really, really important. And that's something that we did back in Stockholm in September. Sigurd and some others organized a really great Nordic Youth Climate Conference that brought together young people who hadn't really been in the international spaces, but were really active locally, not just in climate, but also other issues. And then they got to learn about some of the things we do here, and hopefully we've inspired some of them.
Thank you so much. I'll go ladies first. Alicia.
Let's see if it's gonna work. I think so. I think this question is quite personal because I have come to this space when I was 17 without speaking English, without ever knowing what UNFCCC was actually. And then I landed in COP20 in Peru, so the COP before COP21. And I've realized all the gaps that we have in the climate movement. Even in the youth constituency, I am from the youth constituency. It's such an aggressive space sometimes for you as someone from the Global South. So they expect everyone to speak English, but have we thought that many of the countries in the Global South do not speak English? And it's crazy for me that interpretation is something that people only started thinking 2 or 3 years ago in an UNFCCC context. So when I entered the UNFCCC, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I don't know if it's for me, but it's interesting. And after 3 or 4 years trying to understand the space, I'm like, I think I know what is needed to make this space a little bit better for young people. So when I created the Latin American Youth Climate Scholarship, we wanted to work with Black and Indigenous peoples. And you cannot work with Black and Indigenous peoples if you don't have these people engaged in the development of the program. So we invited someone that has been working with us for a few years in other programs, Alicia Vivian. She's indigenous from the Arhuaco people in Colombia. And you're like, if we are doing this, we need you because it's a perspective that I cannot bring. As a person of color, I cannot tell what indigenous peoples need in this space. And then we're like, what is the DREAM program, basically? What are all the things we need to have for young people to meaningfully engage? I honestly don't love this idea, the fairy tale of participation, because you can pay young people to be here and they will just be going around not knowing what to do. And what is that for? For their frustration, because they go back to their countries and their communities and they're like, I have said nothing, I've learned nothing because I don't know how to navigate this space. So for me, it's about how meaningful it is. So we're like, we need interpretation. Interpretation costs a lot of money. I've learned that. But we do it because for me, it's the basic. So today, if you enter any negotiation rooms in finance or adaptation, you see 5 interpreters sitting on the floor. We travel them to any and all climate conferences. They do simultaneous interpretation for Spanish and Portuguese 8 hours a day. So our scholars can listen to the negotiations in their own language so they can engage meaningfully. This is the basic, and why don't we talk about the basic? We fund them to COPs and SBs because we understand that it's a 1-year-long process. You just don't send someone to COP and say, hey, there you're going to understand what people do. It's at least a 1-year process. We give them capacity building in their own languages with experts from the region, with indigenous experts, have safety sessions, what safety looks like in an UNFCCC. We have an anti-discrimination protocol that protects them and protects everyone around us. When something happens, this is what we're going to do to protect you. We pay psychologists for our indigenous scholars that come here for the first time. It's a huge burden and it's a huge responsibility for them to come representing their whole communities. Places where there is no hope on the UNFCCC. So I think there are so many layers of, you can always do more, and I feel like we just stop at participation. So I think for likes, we literally didn't compromise. We can compromise in the negotiation rooms, or parties can compromise, but we don't have to compromise on our values. So what are the values that are close to your heart, and how do you uphold them? We do it as an organization of 3 people, 2 being from the Global South. We only receive funding from philanthropies. So if we do it from the position that we are in, I can just imagine what people from the Global North, especially in Europe, could do if they really set their intentions right. I recently got my German citizenship, but I do not identify myself with Europe, even though I've been living there for many years. It's just a sense of responsibility that I have and that I carry with myself. So we are not here. This is the first panel actually that I speak in the last 3 years at COP, because I do not like to take speaking opportunities. This is not my space anymore. I've been here. I know how to navigate as a space. If you are speaking all the time, something is wrong. You need to bring new people in. You need to be in the shadows. Like I always say, I'm the shadow of my program. No one knows me, but everyone knows my scholars, because that's how you should do it. So I think as young people, we come here and we're like, oh, it's a shiny, bright space where there's media and things happening all the time. If you're in front of the camera very often, I'm telling you, you're doing something wrong, because that's not the point. So how to open ways, give steps back, and always bring new people in. So this year, we are finishing our scholarship, because for the past year, we have brought 45 Indigenous and Black young people from Latin America here. They are still in the process. This is what meaningful means, that even when we don't support them, they find their own ways to be here. And we are creating now a fellowship, because we want to focus on expertise, on having young people as experts, and not only going to the negotiation rooms and listening. So we are evolving to something that evolved with our scholars and our participation. But yeah, I've talked a lot. I think we have a huge responsibility as young people in this space to understand when it's our time to give a step back. And I think it's a lesson that we can all learn.
Thank you so much. So maybe we'll jump right to Sigurd.
Thank you very much, Alicia. And I think it was very nice, even though we don't have much time, to hear a bit about your vision for climate advocacy in general, because true leaders create other leaders, not followers. I think that was very true from the things you said. Yeah, thank you. I want to reflect on that and congratulate you. No, but when it comes to climate finance and how I've been working with it, I think the main thing I've been trying to pose to the EU negotiators is that, it's always this fight to the bottom of how much money anyone should give when it comes to climate change. And it's like they haven't read the same reports as the rest of us. They often, the EU is good about saying we need the best available science, but when that best available science is economics, then they're a bit more quiet. Because from any way we look at this, it is a great investment to do climate finance. It is the only way we can ensure an habitable planet for everyone. Sometimes, I want to start with the most successful multilateral environmental agreement. Does anyone know which one that is? Anyone want to nominate one? Most successful one? Probably the Montreal Protocol, as it actually succeeded pretty well in stopping the damages to the ozone layer. And sometimes when we mention this out loud as a very successful approach, some EU negotiators, they'll be whispering in the corners, yeah, that was just because we paid for all of it. The world is different now. We paid for all of it back then. But the thing is, even with the Montreal Protocol, that yes, cost a lot of money. Over the duration of its lifetime and until 2050, it's going to cost the European Union 15 billion euros, but it's going to save 60 billion euros in health costs, in agricultural lands that are not being damaged, in so many other fields that's very easy to measure. So, even though that is one of the biggest investments in terms of multilateral environmental agreements that we've seen before, it pays off also just for the EU and its citizens. And it's not because it's important for me to say that all the value that is given has to come back to the EU. I sometimes say that after how political shifts have been in the recent years in the EU, I start to be fluent in talking Draghi and Draghi report and dividends and investments, because that's the only thing that works now. So, I'm influenced by the way I usually advocate towards the EU with these things. So we have to see the climate crisis as not an investment opportunity, not like this techie fancy thing where, it's about new people making new money, but it's about investing in ourselves. It's investing in the planet that we are caring about and the future. And yes, future generations, yes, the young people, but also just the people living today. I sometimes get the chance to tell some of the people I work with a very, very happy news that I'm really happy to share with them. And that is, it's not just us being here today that's going to be alive in 2050. Many of them will also be alive in 2050. Yes, we will live with this for way longer than they will, but they are also going to live with climate change. It's not only for the sake of us they should do it. They should do it for the sake of themselves to solve this. So, yes, I think, again, two things can be true at once. We should fight for countries that have become richer since 1990 to also pay their fair share, because the world is changing. It doesn't make sense to only look in the way we had developing and developed countries in 1990. But that is a sub goal. That is like a common down, like lower down in the text. The overall goal is that this is a great investment for the EU, for the Nordics, for all parts of the world. And it's not about paying the least, it's about paying the most.
Thank you so much. We're a little constrained for time, so I will have to ask you to maybe shorten the answer to the following question. But this really naturally leads us into, I would even say, maybe the main question of this panel. And that is, where do you see opportunities for the Nordics to work closer with Global South countries on climate finance related solutions? And if we take a more, let's say, decolonial approach, or look at this through a decolonial lens, how should this look in practice? Because oftentimes in the climate finance space, there's a lot of talk, especially by Global South countries, that it can sometimes, the way this finance is distributed or communicated, and these solutions are communicated, can oftentimes come across as almost condescending and almost as if they don't deserve it, or they have to fulfill a plethora of criteria to be eligible for something that they should be easily eligible for in the first place. So I will maybe jump to Bianca immediately.
Sure. Yeah, this works. Great. I'll try to keep it brief and share two main points. The first one being that a lot of the global financial system, also the financial system that's really broken in terms of the climate crisis, comes from a system that was set up in the 1940s after the Second World War during the Bretton Woods Conference. And the world was so different from what it is today. Power dynamics have shifted, so much has changed, and we're still locked into that kind of system. So it ultimately, the question of climate finance transcends the UNFCCC space as well, but you have to talk about it at a larger level. There are some discussions about this within the financing for development space, World Bank and other organizations, but these meetings don't happen as often as COPs. So all of us in the climate finance space also really have a responsibility to take it outside of that system. It's a mammoth, massive, really difficult task to reform a system that we're really locked into. But this has also created a huge debt crisis for a lot of Global South countries who considered as very high credit risk, which is not true, because there are so many economic opportunities in the Global South, but we can't reap them properly because of a lot of these debt structures. And there's also really skewed financial incentives, especially towards fossil fuel and heavy emitting economic activity. So we need to redirect those flows. So that would be my one first point about looking at this from a global perspective. Really difficult, but again, the Nordics can step in and fight for higher ambition there. And my other point, and it echoes a lot of what Alicia was saying, we need to start from the grassroots. We need to talk with local communities, Indigenous people, those who are most marginalized by the climate crisis, find out their needs. We can't just be global North people dictating, oh, this mechanism works in Sweden, let's take it to somewhere else. But we need to really make sure that climate finance flows are responsive to the needs of local populations. So whether that's localizing action, or localizing global financial flows so that they're actually managed by a local entity and not just a Western agency that's operating locally, but really listening to local wisdom. And I think there's so much wisdom in indigenous knowledge. Fun fact, the Nordic countries, Lapland, Finland, Sweden, Norway, have the only recognized indigenous people in Europe. There are more in Europe, but they're the Sami people. So we also can do that. And yeah, really listening to local needs. And another position that Nordics are very advocate for a lot is having better transparency, monitoring, verification of climate finance flows. So really making sure that the money goes to where it has impact. It's a costly process to have that extra auditing and verification, but that can also just strengthen those financial flows and the actual adaptation mitigation outcomes. So yeah, go from the bottom up and look at the global financial system.
Thank you so much. And Alicia?
This microphone, honestly. You said go from the bottom up, and when I think, well, how do we do that? It's something we've been fighting, or people from my program have been fighting since ever, that it is the element of direct access, which we don't have in the NCQG, because all the countries that had said that this was like a super important for them, they were willing to just drop it at the end. So I think direct access is something that we have discussed in the NCQG, and now we are discussing in 2.1c as well. And then the other thing I would like to bring is the idea of risk, because when we are talking, by example, about indigenous communities, giving funds to, by example, indigenous-led funds in Latin America is considered a huge risk by financial institutions, because we can give direct access, but will we respect their own systems of governance? Probably not. And I think that's then the next step that we face when we are assessing those funds. So I think there are so many layers. The idea of risk, the direct access. I think something we've been discussing yesterday in the negotiations on 2.1c are safeguards. And I would say 90% of the parties were talking about the safeguards that they need as countries to accept moving forward with the 2.1c and aligning the finance flows. And only Ghana mentioned that we need safeguards for indigenous peoples, local communities, and other affected areas. So how are we going to align the financial flows and say, hey, everything needs to be aligned to the Paris Agreement, and then we don't have safeguards to protect the people? So I would say there are many ways inside the negotiations that we can try to push for better language. And this is usually then an effort from indigenous youth or young people or the Indigenous Peoples Organization, and it should be everyone's effort. And I think actually it shouldn't be our effort, honestly speaking. These are the things that people that have more power should be advocating for, so we can actually focus on the things that matter for us on the ground level. So I think this shared sense of responsibility is really, really important. And I think the colonial, like we are here, like I think we are very, very far away from anything that will ever be the colonial while we are in the system that is the United Nations. So I really don't personally believe in that, but I believe that we can do the best that we can to make the people from the Global South safe in this space. And that can be parties, it can be non-parties. I think inside the negotiations, outside the negotiations, outside is a space. Your work cannot be defined by the walls of a COP, because COP is 2 times, well, the conferences are 2 times in the year, and people have to live in the Global South for their whole lives. So I would say, yeah, let's assess ourselves and just do better.
Thanks so much. And Sigurd?
Yes, thank you. I truly support all the good things on how we can make direct access, especially for indigenous peoples. But on the question of where we can learn from Nordic community, I'm not sure we are that good at doing that ourselves in the Nordics. So I'm not sure we could be the ones showing the way on that. Denmark often positions itself internationally as very supportive of indigenous people's rights because of Greenland. But I think also sometimes it's pretty much to compensate for things at home. It's a bit different how the different EU countries do with that. But I can say in the UNFCCC space, no, I can't say what happens inside the EU, but you get the point. But if there's a thing that I think the Nordics can help with when it comes to linking the global north and the global south more to make sure that we actually proceed with the things that we want to, especially when it comes to climate finance, is that sometimes, no, a lot of the times the EU feels like it's so hard to be the EU, you know, like, oh, it's so difficult. You wake up every day, you do everything right, you are so perfect, and then everyone still tells you that you're not good enough, you know, like, come on, guys, it's just not good enough. And, you know, as youth delegates, the thing we usually try to position ourselves in, and like our finest job is to like burst that EU bubble when it comes to like just being almost perfect. I had a meeting with the commissioner a few weeks ago, Wopke Hoekstra. I don't think it was Chatham House rules, so I can share with you, where he said that, yeah, I have also, you know, reflected upon this. Why, you know, I was always so harsh on us, on ourselves, and I think it's this Protestant Calvinistic way that we are always, you know, holding ourselves to higher standards than we're doing to others, but we are actually really great, you know. And I was truly baffled from hearing that. So the EU think it's really hard, but they don't seem to understand that no one else see them as like the perfect place to be in the world, and they don't understand that we feel like we're giving so much climate finance and so much ODA, but at the same time, it's like the countries we're giving that ODA to, that they are not really siding with us in these forests, and we're being like, yes, because you're not giving enough, you know, you're not paying up for those responsibilities you have had going back in time, but also what is happening today. But the way we can proceed from that is that if you pay your fair share, and if you make sure that like you pay what is expected from you, yes, you can probably get those countries to also support all your wishes on 21C and, you know, all these things that like is so high up on your wish list. But you have to show them that they can trust you. And I could continue this rant about the EU, you know. We don't have much time, but you know, it's also they always say, oh, but then they just want a new fund, and they want a new fund, and they want a new fund again. Why, like, you know, it's the amount of money doesn't increase with the number of funds, and we're like, no, not necessarily. But if you don't pay up in the funds that are there already, if like the only way they can pressure you is from establishing a new fund with these very specific goals, where it will also be very embarrassing that there's no money in these funds. Yes, it is the way to get new money. But if you just paid up, it is about the money. It's not about the amount of funds. If you paid up and showed you were ready to also reform the way the financial flows are happening and the way that these money are giving out. And it's not just new and additional climate finance, because before we are using it on schools, you know, ODA is the worst. I think the Nordics can be a lead on that. In the EU, it will be able to connect to the global south, and it will be able to see the change that we need. Yeah. That was my whole vision, as you could probably hear. When I get started, it's difficult to stop. I hope I didn't use all the time.
No, we're still on track. So I think maybe to finish it off, we will have time for maybe 2 questions max, but we will have to keep it brief. Maybe to summarize what we have discussed, I think for me, listening to you speak, some of the main themes, if I'm correct, that kind of came up is this idea of first building trust, building partnerships between the global south and the global north, and really coming from a position as equal partners and understanding not just what we need now, but also what we needed in the past and what role history plays and historical relations play in this entire sort of concept and context of climate finance. And also we've discussed how important it is to really start from the grassroots level, and to also not be very tokenistic with youth and to take them quite seriously, because as I think we've all heard, the perspectives here from our panelists have been extremely insightful. And I think this is maybe on the last note for me personally, I find it sometimes frustrating in this space, or when you're applying for jobs in this space, where it says minimum X amount of years needed for this role. And I think we all between us haven't accumulated many years of professional experience in this space, and yet it's still very hard to be taken seriously. So thank you so much. We have time for 2 questions. Please keep it brief. Yes?
So you mentioned both, like wanting transparency as far as where the money goes and like what it impacts, but also wanting greater control for local communities over the money. So, how much like power and autonomy do the local communities really end up having?
And who is your question directed to?
Her.
Thank you. So, and then the second question, do we have another one? Yes.
Hello, my name is Luis. I'm from Bolivia. I'm part of the delegation, a youth delegation called Life of Pachamama. We are a group of 20 young people from the Global South. Here's my fellow colleague, Gabriela, who's from Colombia. First of all, thank you for this space. And based on the experience that I've been able to hear from you, if you could think of some tips, some recommendations on how can you mobilize pressure on governments or companies to direct climate finance away from greenwashing towards real net zero pathways, what would be that in terms of climate justice, maybe transparent carbon removal budgets? Any of the two would be great. So thank you.
So I think maybe we'll start with the first question, Bianca, and then maybe we can share the second question between our 2 panelists. Yeah.
Thank you. So the question was who has the power in climate financing at the moment? Was that your? And whom has it? Well, at the moment it is quite strongly skewed towards the providers of the finance, which often are from the global north. I think it's not always reaching communities who need it, and I don't have any concrete examples, but I do know that financing goes through a lot of different levels before it really reaches those that it's meant to reach, and sometimes it doesn't even reach that properly. And then there's also issues, especially sometimes with technology transfer and others, where country X will set up a program in another country, but it doesn't really work. The conditions are not the same in Sweden than they might be in another country. So in that sense, that's often where the power is. And the point I was making is that we need to decouple that a lot more. And we need to actually engage local communities much more into what really are your needs, how can climate finance help bridge them, listen to indigenous knowledge as well, and to how climate is impacting them and what they really need. And often solutions need to be implemented so that they work for the society there as well, because there are different social norms depending on where you are. And there's been, I learned a story that I heard from someone who'd done a project on electrification in a local community, and then electrification and water access. And all of a sudden, which was a great development, they'd set up clean grid and electricity in the system. And all of a sudden, women didn't need to go very far to find wood. And it created a lot of social benefits, but it also took some away, because that time was often time that women used to build community, to learn from it, like to educate girls, for instance. And then in the end, that project didn't really work, because it caused a lot of social tension, because women didn't have their own time anymore in that sense. I'm not saying it's not always like this, but the case was it was just an international organization creating a project that had worked somewhere else into another country. So we need to localize the needs a lot more and really listen to what local communities need and how can we adapt potentially a global mechanism. And to the monitoring points is just making and just calling for greater transparency of climate finance flows, and really branding flows that are climate finance as real climate finance. That goes to your greenwashing question, which we can then move into, is to make sure that the funding really reaches those who need it and it has on the ground impact that's meaningful.
yes, I think I'll be the one answering the second question. I think it goes for both if you live in a democracy, if you don't, if you, across all levels. It's the numbers that count. It's when we go out and tell that young people are 50% of the world population, that has weight. When we can't say the exact same in Denmark because everyone is so old, but it has weight that we are the power, we are the people that should be governed with these policies. And so my main proposal when it comes to how do we show that young people want the world to be this way is to think about the numbers, to be like, yes, we do have a lot of people who think this, and they maybe they whisper it in the corners, but they have to scream it out loud. They have to gather in the streets. They have to do all these things. And maybe gather in the streets is a good thing. Maybe I have seen that it can be difficult to always get people to be gathering in the streets continuously. Like at some point, that when they feel frustrated about only doing the advocacy that way, and if it doesn't have the impact that is needed. And that is when it's still not about the numbers, but then organized young people, organize in organizations where you feel like you can make a difference in. Because I usually have a saying that all young people should have a place to engage in, which respond to their capacity, time-wise and experience-wise, and that level has to reflect like the level of expertise and time they put into it has to be reflected in the outcome and the actual difference it makes. Because no one wants just to be engaged in something to learn about it. We want to make the world a better place. And if we can make sure all youth have those spaces, that being on the streets, that being in organizations, that being in the rooms we are in now, we can engage them to see they can actually make a difference for themselves, for the world, and for the future that we want.
And on that note, I'm afraid that we are a little bit out of time and maybe even a little bit over time, but that is quite all right. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your questions. They were very, very useful and insightful. Thank you also for the speakers for taking the time to be here today with us. And on behalf again of Generation Climate Europe, we wish to thank you for taking part in our event. Thank you.